Hello, I am Benjamin Heitzma, the Interfaith intern here at the Calvin University's Service Learning Center, and with me is Fred Stella, a outreach minister at the West Michigan Hindu Temple, and also a member of the Interfaith Dialogue Association. Thanks so much for being here with us.
My pleasure.
So maybe we can start just by asking about the Hindu Temple. Could you maybe start by explaining your role at the Hindu Temple and maybe how you got involved?
Sure. My position is that of, now you mentioned the term outreach minister. That is correct. The Sanskrit name, and for those who aren't aware, Sanskrit is the sacred language of Hinduism in the same way that biblical Hebrew is the sacred language of the Jews, and Latin, the sacred language of the Catholics, etc. So Sanskrit, which is the mother tongue of India, is that's the language we use. And so the term in Sanskrit is pracharak. So, and pracharak can be translated a couple of different ways. We use it to indicate outreach minister. And one interesting thing about this is we came up with that term. We came up with calling me a pracharak, and that it would be translated as outreach minister. And so one of the things that I do is I take people on tours. Usually they're groups. And I've taken a number of Calvin groups throughout the years. We've been around for going on a dozen years. And yeah, Calvin groups have been there a number of times, as have some of the other religious colleges. And one time in a Q&A session, as I was explaining my role, and I was talking about how Hinduism is non-evangelical, which we can get to a little later on. They were interested in why we would use this term, because in their understanding, what an outreach minister would do in a Christian context would be to grow a church. And that is not my job at all. If anything, I chase people away. I mean, my job is not to grow the temple. My job is to bring the community into the temple and the temple into the community. Mm-hmm. But when I bring the community into the temple, we let them go afterwards when we're done with them. So I'm also the person, for instance, Calvin and Grand Valley, all of the colleges in the area, if they have an interest in a speaker, whether it's an anthropology class, world religions, history, no matter what, if they contact the temple, I'm the person who is sent out there. I also do pastoral work. So I am ordained. It is an ordained position. I am on the dark side. I'm clergy. All of the hospitals have my contact information. If somebody wishes to speak to a Hindu, if they're a patient or a family of a patient, I'm the person who's contacted for that. And you know, different things come up, but I would say those are the things that keep me the most busy. And I will also say too, we get a lot of email at the temple. For instance, perfect example, tonight I'm going to meet a young lady from, I think it's it's from Kendall. It's from Kendall College, which is of course part of Ferris. And she's doing a project on the meaning of life, and she's contacting people of a variety of religions to find out what we think is the meaning of life. And so if you approach the Hindu temple and you were just interested in Hinduism, that is also forwarded to me and I take care of it. In terms of how I got involved, I have been a part of the Hindu community here in Grand Rapids for well over 20 years, to one degree or another, before we had a temple. Before we had a temple, much of what we did was meeting in people's homes or meeting in rented facilities. Mm-hmm. And so I've been involved, and then, you know, about a dozen years ago, we got very ambitious and decided we had enough people and financial resources to start a temple. And shortly after that, and this is something I think it will probably resonate with Christians, regardless of the religion. Churches or houses of worship in general that have a significant population of first-generation Americans tend to be more insular. They tend to be around, whether you're talking about Korean Christians or Vietnamese Buddhists or Indian Hindus. And there was consensus in the board that they wanted to make sure that we did not do that we were not insular, that we were a part of the community. And it was also decided that the person in this position would be ordained, because we wanted to be able to have, I'm talking about me now, but I'm not going to last forever. There hopefully will be other people in this position. We wanted, if ever there was some interfaith effort, we wanted to give somebody to that effort who was on equal footing with Christian ministers, Jewish rabbis, Muslim imams, and all of that. Because, and I realize this is probably a little bit more into the weeds than you might want, but so we have priests at the temple, okay? But Hindu priests are not ministers. They perform the ceremonies, but they are not teachers, and they're not counselors in the same way that your Christian pastor might be, or your Jewish rabbi might be, right? Part of seminary training is pastoral training, and it's also theological training. And while it is true that the priests certainly have a good understanding of theology, being able to teach that theology is not what they're trained to do. And also a lot of priests who come from India, they get trained in seminaries in India, they don't have the best command of English. We have two wonderful priests at the West Michigan Hindu Temple. Both of them would shy away from giving a lengthy discourse to people, particularly English-speaking non-Hindus. Right. So that's probably a way overlong answer to the question of what do I do and how did I get involved? So there you go.
That's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, and maybe could you kind of explain, maybe for someone who doesn't know much about Hinduism, kind of like what is Hinduism? That's a big question, but maybe kind of get at the basics.
I will try to make this as brief as possible, but that's a challenge. So let me go over the basic points. Hinduism is the third largest religion in the world. It is considered to be the world's oldest of the major religions. And it originates in India, as most people can guess. Now, it's really interesting because the fact that you have a white guy talking about Hinduism, who is a practicing Hindu, is really rare. Your odds of doing this are very slim, okay? Other people in other learning institutions who came up with your idea, and they're going to contact their local Hindu temple, you're not going to get a white guy. Actually, I prefer the category Mediterranean gold, but there's no box for that. So Hinduism is, at least of the major religions, let's not talk about indigenous religions, right? But of the major religions, Hinduism is the most identified with an ethnicity. Think about this. If you were going to interview a fellow Christian and it turned out that that person was going to be Black from Africa or Syrian or Russian or Chinese, you wouldn't bat an eyebrow. It's like, what? You're not white? No, you wouldn't do that. if you were interviewing a Muslim, the same thing. While a lot of uneducated, at least in this area, while a lot of people who are not aware, they assume that to be Muslim you have to be Middle Eastern. That's wrong. Actually, Middle Easterners are a minority in the Muslim world. Mm-hmm. But Islam is represented all over the world through a variety of ethnicities, right? You can be Chinese, you can be Russian, you can be Middle Eastern, and you can be Indian. India has the second largest Muslim population in the world, okay? And then there's Pakistan. So, but when you think of Hinduism, you do think of Indian, and I'll tell you why. Hinduism did not spread all over the world in the same way that Christianity and Islam did. For two reasons. First of all, ancient India was a pretty peaceful nation, and there was a prohibition really in Hindu thought to go outside of the parameters of the country and create empire. So you did not have hordes of Indians going east and trying to conquer, west to conquer the Middle East, or west to conquer China or Japan or anything like that, or Vietnam. That just wasn't a thing. Second of all, Hinduism does not have a Great Commission. Nobody told anybody to go forth to all nations and make known this thing called Hinduism. So I think that those two facts right there tell us why Hinduism was kept in India for so long. Now, there are other countries that have significant Indian or Hindu populations. Nepal, which is right to the north, Sri Lanka, the island off India. Several African countries have significant Hindu populations, as do Caribbean nations, which may surprise people. But the reason for that is, are you familiar with the program called indentured servitude?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Where
Okay.
where they take servants and they make them work for a couple of years before setting them free, kind of.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. And it's usually more than a couple of years.
Right.
But you got the idea, yeah.
Yeah.
So when the British stopped using slaves, they still had work to be done. And at that point, the sun did not set on the British Empire. It was worldwide. And so Indians were shipped all over the place, including the Caribbean, including Africa, and the South Pacific, all over the place. And that's how they established a foothold in those other countries. But still, because of this understanding that we're not supposed to bring in converts, all right, it for the most part has stuck to Indian populations, or the heirs of India, the great grandchildren of Indians. Okay, so that is one significant difference between Hinduism and some of the other religions that spread in a rather imperial manner. Theologically, when you ask what is Hinduism, it is a religion that has the understanding that that entity, which we call the Creator, God with a capital G, is not different from the creation, meaning that God permeates this, what we call creation. Another word that's actually better in this context would be manifestation. Okay, so the world around you is a part of God. It is not just a creation of God, but it doesn't mean that God is the world and you're limiting God to the world. God exists within creation and God exists beyond creation. So there are some people who have this understanding that, God is the world. Well, what if, God forbid, an asteroid destroyed the world, or the atomic warfare destroyed the world, would that mean the end of God? No, of course not. God exists above and beyond. So what that means is the most important part of the theology there is then that the soul, the human soul, is a part of God. And so that there cannot be any separation from God. There can only be the appearance of separation from God. And ultimately that means that, well, I'll put it this way, and people who are exposed to Calvinism can understand this. In Calvinism, you have the doctrine of predestination, right? Hindus also have a form of predestination, but it's different. Our predestination understanding, and believe me, no other Hindu you ever meet is going to even know what predestination is from a, so if you meet somebody who's Hindu and, oh yeah, my friend says you got predestination too. You have to explain, you have to go back to the 16th century and start there and then tell them what I said. What is the predestination of Hinduism, as opposed to that there are some who are elect and some who are not, is that everybody is elect, so to speak. That because God can't be separate from God, each soul ultimately will merge with the divine, will have this blissful, joyous existence. Now, before you get to that, there is the process called samsara, or rebirth. So while we may miss the mark in this lifetime or the next lifetime or 15 lifetimes before that, what our scriptures tell us is that every embodied soul will at some point, whether it's one lifetime from now, whether it's this lifetime, whether it's 20 lifetimes from now, will awaken to this understanding of God within. And the next time the body dies, that the soul will rise to a higher spiritual level. There is something like purgatory that the Catholics have, but purgatory is often considered some form of suffering. Right. And I would only say that those people who caused a lot of suffering will endure a lot of suffering in these after-death states. But those after-death states are not eternal. So no matter how vile a person you are, you will come back in human form. You're not going to be born an ant or an amoeba or something. You'll come back in human form. And each lifetime is considered an opportunity for spiritual growth. Now, keep in mind, I'm saying the opportunity for spiritual growth, you don't have to take it, okay? So, oftentimes we're asked about free will. The answer is, microcosmically, we have free will. Macrocosmically, we don't. So what that means is that you have a choice in your life. You can be a gross materialist. You can be a hedonist. You can be a narcissist. I'm sorry, the election's over. Let's move on from that. You can be a pretty bad person, and that is your choice. Or you can decide that the only thing that will truly fulfill you is a God-centered life, right? But so again, you have that choice. But ultimately, the soul inside you, which is the real you, hungers for God, even if this outer Ben doesn't get it. The soul is hungry for God. So at some point in your spiritual evolution, you're going to wake up and say, you know what? Feeding the senses doesn't make me happy. I mean, I like to have food in my belly. That's right. But it doesn't have to be gourmet cuisine that I eat every day. And I don't have to acquire masses and masses amount of money to make me happy. I don't have to be promiscuous to find pleasure there. All of these things, it's sort of predestined that you will, again, maybe not in this lifetime, but at some time in the future. And that's when the real spiritual work begins. And when you reach the state of self-realization or enlightenment, there are various words for it, it doesn't mean you're perfect. Perfection is not possible on this plane. I think every religion would agree to that. However, you can be not perfect and yet have a perfect understanding of your relationship with God. So I will leave it there. Of course, oftentimes when I'm asked, explain Hinduism, I'm given an hour just for that question alone. So I'll leave it there and we can move on.
Yes, thank you. That was great. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe could you go into, you kind of talked about this before, but maybe go a little bit into the history of the West Michigan Hindu Temple.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm not sure if you're aware of the racist immigration laws that kept Asians out of this country for so long. But we had a terrible policy. And that policy was repealed in 1965 through Congress and the president at the time, which was Johnson. And all of a sudden, the floodgates opened. Immigration wasn't just for Europeans anymore. And so you had a slew of people coming in, particularly from Asia. And so that meant Chinese, Japanese, and of course, Indian. And within a matter of 10 years, you really had a significant Indian population here in the United States that you never had before. I mean, you had Indians, but not to this degree. There were very, very few temples, only in the most major cities in the country. And usually they were pretty small. So around the early 1970s, you started having Indian immigrants come in, okay? And as I mentioned before, at that time, there weren't enough to say, let's get a building and be a temple. So it was really kind of a wonderful time, even though we did not have that central location. And I can guarantee you nobody wants to go back to the early 70s. And I wasn't here back then. I didn't come to Grand Rapids till 1980. I'm born and raised in Detroit. So, but from what I know of the history, you had this very tight-knit community, and we did not have any priests. So one of two things would happen. Number one, you don't need a priest to have a Hindu ceremony. Anybody who knows how to conduct a Hindu ceremony can conduct it, okay? So you had some people in the area who conducted ceremonies on occasion. Some people who knew the scriptures, and just the same, like anybody in Christianity, it may vary from denomination to denomination, but oftentimes you have lay leaders of Bible study, right? Not officially ordained clergy. So anybody who happened to know the scriptures could share on the scriptures, and life went on. And then the other Indians who came over, some were Muslim, and of course, with Islam, you have many other countries. So the Muslim population grew faster because you had Indians coming in along with Egyptians and Yemenis and Pakistanis and everybody else. So you had a mosque first. Then you also have the Sikhs. Now, Sikhism is a religion that started in Hinduism in the same way that Jesus was a Jew, but Christianity is no longer Judaism. The founder of Sikhism is Guru Nanak, and about 500 years ago. And Guru Nanak was born into Hindu culture as a Hindu, created a movement that ultimately became its own religion. They started coming into, and they created their house of worship, which in Sikhism, it's called a Gurdwara. So they created a Gurdwara a couple of years before we did. And then a dozen years ago, we finally were able to open up a temple. It's open 7 days a week. It's a whole different model than Christianity, where, you know, first of all, of course, you're going to be open on Sunday. And oftentimes there's a midweek service, so you might get together on a Wednesday or something else. And there are special occasions, Christmas and all. But in Hinduism, you do have congregational worship, but temples are usually open daily, and people go there for their private meditation and prayer. Okay, so you might have literally one ceremony a day, and yet you're open for hours, and people come in of their own accord. The West Michigan Hindu Temple, our hours are 10 a.m. till 1 p.m. We close for the afternoon and reopen around 5:30, and we are open until 8. Okay, so yes, anytime. And it's interesting. I can't imagine anybody ever asking you if it was okay for a non-Christian to come to your church. Right? I mean,
Right.
Okay. So many people ask me, could I ever go there? Like, I'm like, well, for the right price. Tell you what, you slip me a 20 and I'll get you in first in line. Of course it's okay for non-Hindus to go to the Hindu temple. Absolutely. You can go. Now, I tell people this, if you go completely on your own, if you just jump in the car at 5 o'clock and you're there, you will be welcomed. Okay. There's no problem. You may not understand it. Right. And the priests who are there, again, they do speak English. Both of them speak English, but haltingly. You may not walk out of there with the depth and breadth of understanding that you would hope. Certainly not if I walked into your church and your pastor was there. I mean, 2 hours later, I'd walk out and I'd be pretty well versed in Christianity. If I was there along with the priests, I hope you could say the same thing. Okay. But yes, everybody and anybody is welcome. And they're also, I really appreciate the fact that people ask about etiquette, right? So they're thinking, well, maybe things are different going into my church or synagogue than going into a Hindu temple. And really, the only thing is take your shoes off in the vestibule. You know, that's it. I'm assuming you wouldn't come in chowing on a Big Mac. That I would also advise against that. But then again, you wouldn't walk into your church chewing on a Big Mac. Okay, so there's no other etiquette other than the respect you would show in any house of worship. Okay, so yeah, that's who we are. We're located on Whitneyville Road in the Ada Cascade area. Sorry, I got a kitty who wants to be on Zoom. So yeah, I'd say that was it for now, unless you have anything more specific to ask about the temple.
Yeah, actually, I was just kind of curious. You've kind of talked about this, but what would like a typical ceremony look like? And I'm sure there's different ceremonies, but like, are there any common elements to them?
Yeah, yes, that's a good question. That is true. There are multiple ceremonies. We call our ceremonies pujas.
Mhm.
And for instance, we have one called a havan. And a havan is a fire ceremony. We actually have a fire pit built right into the center of our sanctuary.
Mhm.
And there, we just have these wonderful big fires. You know, it's so interesting too. Think about how attracted we are as a species to fire, and particularly communal fire.
Mhm. Yeah.
When you walk into somebody's home and the fireplace is going,
Mhm.
even if it's not that cold, there's something that just draws you in. We have bonfires, we have campfires,
Mhm.
and you know, I can't explain it. Yes, of course, if there is a genuine need for warmth, if we're freezing out in the forest, yes, we need a fire. But oftentimes, beach fires and campfires, they're done in the middle of the summer, and we still love them.
Mhm.
And I get the same feeling when we go to a fire ceremony. And a fire ceremony is symbolic of burning our karma, burning our
Mhm.
flaws. Remember that a lot of this is symbolic of inner work, and of itself, if it's not taken in the right spirit, is meaningless.
Mhm.
Okay, somebody thinks, oh, I'm going to go to a fire ceremony, just like the Catholic who goes to confession and says, you know, oh, Father, I stole something this week, and then thinks, well, I got off of that, and I can steal something this week and come back next Saturday and you know, confess the same sin. A priest would tell you, no, you're not gaining any spiritual ground by
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
Same thing with our ceremonies. There has to be inner work to accompany
Mhm.
what's going on outwardly.
Mhm.
We have ceremonies where our statues are bathed in liquids like water, milk, yogurt, orange juice. And it's called an abhishekam, and it's funny because there's just something about that that's so icky gooey messy that you can't take your eyes off it. And again, it's symbolic of an inner cleansing.
Mhm.
You still have to do the work inside, but that's what it's encouraging
Mhm.
us to do. It all of the ceremonies, and there's chanting that is going on, and the chanting is in Sanskrit.
Mhm.
Okay, so imagine, if you will, going to a ceremony, whatever it is, where the conductor of the ceremony is chanting the Psalms in Hebrew.
Mhm.
Okay, that would be kind of sort of what we're talking about.
Mhm.
And the people who are attending this, by and large, they speak Hindi or other Indian languages, which are the progenies of Sanskrit. So it'd be kind of like an Italian or a Spaniard going to a Catholic mass in Latin, where they kind of get it because both of their language descended from Latin, but they're not perfect.
Mhm.
Okay, um, and this is something else to keep in mind, that the Hindu temple does not define Hinduism,
Mhm.
meaning that, for instance, in Christianity, you have low church and high church, right? You have denominations that absolutely dispense with anything that would be called ritual.
Mhm.
And then you have the Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox, where it's all about ritual and that sacred space of a church. A Catholic has a bit more regard for the church building than a Protestant does.
Mhm.
Okay, there are many Hindus whom you might call, tongue-in-cheek, of course, Protestant Hindus. By that, I mean, it's not a works grace thing at all. Okay. What I mean by that is they just are not attracted to ceremony.
Right.
It's just not their thing. They may be contemplatives. They may feel that instead of going to the temple and taking part in a ceremony, they would go to the temple when there is no ceremony and just meditate. Or belong to a meditation group, which may meet in the temple or may meet in somebody's home. And no statues and nothing really ritualistic other than, if a low church service starts at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning and begins with a hymn, you might call that a ritual, right? Everybody knows when it starts at 11, it starts with a hymn. It doesn't start with a sermon, okay? But that's like bare bones ritual. Right. So a meditation group might have some bare bones kind of ritual to it, but not the over-the-top uber ritual that you would find in a temple. The difference between how Hindus may deal with one another is different from historical Christianity, not the Christianity of today. Today, there is so much more tolerance and acceptance. It's not universal, but a lot of Christians would say, oh, you go to this Baptist church where nothing happens and they have communion, 3 times a year. And I go to this Catholic church and we have communion every week, and communion is, the Eucharist is central to what we do. And I'm fine with that. Right. There's more of that. Just think 100 years ago, a Presbyterian marrying a Methodist would cause all sorts of consternation in the family. Right. Yeah. But that's not true for the most part these days. Hinduism is very pluralistic and acknowledges that there are many different pathways to God. And so, and of course, anybody can have an ego and anybody can be self-righteous if the mood strikes them. But ideally, a Hindu, say, who is a contemplative, who really does not resonate with any formal ceremony, should not go to the person who does and say, stop this silly superstitious nonsense, come meditate with me. No, you are supposed to accept the person where they are. And that should also lead to how people outside of Hinduism are treated. Okay, so it is considered a sin for me to say to you, Ben, what are you doing being Christian? Why don't you come to the temple and see what's shaking over there? Maybe we can make you a better deal. I can't do that. Now, there have been a couple of Hindu movements who have colored outside the lines and attempted a more evangelical mission, but they have been condemned by mainstream Hinduism as being that's just not the way to do things. Because remember, the soul that you are underneath Ben is just as much a part of God as the soul that is underneath Fred. Right. Okay. Both of us, according to the Hindu scriptures, have the same ultimate destination. So I'm not saving you from anything. Right. Okay. The only thing that I could probably offer you if you left your church and joined the Hindu temple is probably a higher grade of food. That's about it. Other than that, nothing. I always say if ever I was to cut a commercial for Hinduism, the tagline would be, Hinduism, come for enlightenment, but stay for dinner. So.
That's great. Do you guys have like communal meals then at the temple sometimes, or?
Oh yeah.
Oh. That's great.
Yes, absolutely. And here's the, I actually would invite you to the temple because you, young man, would have a leg up on people when they see people who are non-Indian. Okay, when people line up, they always give white people cuts. Seriously, seriously. Because they assume you're a guest.
Right.
Okay, they assume you're a guest, and sometimes there's a line, and there's a group of people who've never met me, and they'll give me cuts. I take them. So I would make sure you got your cuts too. But yeah, we do have we have a wonderful kitchen, and a lot of times people bring stuff that they've made at home, and yeah, food is definitely a part of everything.
That's great.
So yeah.
Maybe just to close on our section on the Hindu temple, I was just curious if there's any challenges that the temple is facing today, especially with like the pandemic and closures like that. But also maybe if there's any opportunities and things that you guys are planning for or looking forward to at the temple.
Yes. Okay. So as far as challenges, yes, we are challenged with the pandemic, and we now operate very, very strictly. Not only is everyone masked and social distanced, but we keep the population, kitty again, sorry. We keep the population down. There is, for the most part, no more than maybe a dozen to 20 people in the temple at a time, and it's a good size. The sanctuary is a really good sized room. It can accommodate a couple hundred at least. So we do that. A lot of our events have been Zoomed, and so I'm really, really proud of the way that we have responded, because as you may know, some houses of worship have not responded in a scientific manner to this issue. But you have to understand that the Hindu community has an inordinate number of physicians in it. Okay, yeah, we really do. A lot of doctors. And so with that, and if you're not a doctor, you could be a biologist, a chemist. I don't know if you're aware of this, but in listing the religions that have an expression in the United States, Hinduism has the largest percentage of college-educated people.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I believe when it comes to earning, and believe me, this is nothing to brag about, because just because you make money doesn't mean that you're a great religion. But if we're not number one, we're number two. But I'll tell you why. It's not the religion per se. The religion may have something to do with that. I shouldn't say that, because as with Judaism, study it's built into the religion. Okay. But the reason is, okay, let's take another immigrant group. Let's take the Mexicans. Mexicans who come to the United States, by and large, are poor. Okay, or at least they're low income, and they're looking for a better life. And oftentimes they're uneducated, or maybe high school education or something like that. So Mexicans do a lot of labor jobs. I often kiddingly say we never showed India our Statue of Liberty, because if we did, they may have sent us their tired, poor, huddled masses yearning to breathe free, as it says in the Lazarus poem. They didn't see it, so they sent us their physicians, their entrepreneurs, their engineers, their IT specialists, their educators. The people who come over from India, by and large, already have an education. Okay, maybe they're going to further their education here, but if they at least have a bachelor's, and some of them already have their advanced degree, some of them are already like practicing physicians and biologists, scientists, et cetera, et cetera. So because of that, you have an inordinate amount of people who are higher income and better educated. So it's very unfair to compare Hindus or Indians with other ethnic groups and say, well, you know, why are the Hindus doing so well and the other people aren't? Well, it's simply because of the migration pattern.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Okay. But and as far as what's on tap, well, as you and I are speaking today, we just found out that it looks like, cross fingers, a vaccine is on the table.
Mm-hmm.
So we are thrilled and are hoping that at least by maybe the spring of 2021, if things go well, that we'll start doing things live and in person. Mm-hmm. Not as much Zooming of things. But again, I'm very proud of how we responded. Mm-hmm. And we were on the spot as soon as the temple leadership knew that there was an issue with COVID. We were ahead of the game. Mm-hmm. So which means, you know, we might be the last person to relax our rules too. So right. We'll see what happens.
That's great. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much for telling me about the Hindu temple. Sure. Maybe we can move on to another thing that you're part of, the Interfaith Dialogue Association.